a little bit about mapping in places where mapping is not necessarily possible and what that looks like. So, question to the audience, who is this guy?
George Orwell.
George Orwell, very good. So George Orwell was actually born in Burma. And a little known fact, he did his military service in Burma as well. And he wrote a book about this experience that he had there called Burmese Days. And inside the country, they actually talk about the history through the lens of his 3 books, saying that the colonial period was Burmese days, the rise of socialism, Animal Farm, and the current society in which they live to be 1984. So here's a quick glimpse of a photo that I took inside Burma to give you a bit of a sense of what the country looks like at this point. They don't necessarily have much access to technology, but they do have access to guns and other sorts of interesting technology tools. So recently there was an uprising by the monks, where the monks took to the streets to protest against the rise in guns and the reduction in education, and they were clamped down upon. But this is an image that we saw around the world being broadcast by friends like Pinyazata, who were hiding cameras in the folds of their robes. And these messages were being sent outside of the country and then beamed back into the country and all around the world. Because despite the fact that it's a dictatorship like 1984, the internet is starting to penetrate. And so these voices and these stories are starting to get out. Even during the protest, you couldn't ask your neighbor, where's the protest happening, where's the map, because you could be killed. You had to rely on getting that message out, saying, I plan on having it here, and then having them send the message back in to, okay, this is where I can go to start protesting. There are interesting gaps in getting information in and out of these countries. In a dictatorship like Burma, they'll block email, but they don't block secure email. So you can get to Gmail through an SSL connection, so a secure access, but not through something like this. Because even in closed societies, there are beautiful examples of gaps. So while satellites are thoroughly illegal, in downtown Burma you can have satellites just hanging out on top of a building, beaming information out, beaming information back in. And so the question of what we were trying to do was, how can you start documenting instances of human rights abuses? So we started to look at the borders and the information as it traveled, and found that there was spillover of cell phones inside and around the country. Around the countries where you can start getting an Indian cell phone reception inside of Burma. And you'll notice that even with the technology barriers, you have newspapers that talk about things like Facebook, LiveJournal, etc. And so we start to look at, okay, well, what is the opportunity for open source tools like Firefox, where there's actually a democracy in the code, where people can look at the code, recode it, rehack it, and then build out new projects. So this was initially built in Kenya to document post-election violence, and we've been using it to map human rights abuses throughout the country, where people can use phones, email, Twitter, and start adding information about different human rights abuses directly onto a map, and really for the first time see a cohesive map of their entire country, where there are different languages, different religions, and different ethnic groups. To create much more solidarity, which is the biggest threat to any sort of regime. And you can break it down and start visualizing it for people. And because it's open source, it's the first app that's actually in local languages. So you can see it in Burmese language. You can see it translated into different local languages, Kachin, etc. So we're working with the University of Maryland to actually start taking a lot of this data and putting it onto the map. As people will document the abuses, they'll then need to actually figure out, okay, what are the geolocations and all of this. When people talk about technology, a lot of the question is Facebook. And Facebook is sort of the biggest problem to us, because somebody will document a human rights abuse and risk their life doing that, and they'll say, hey, I should become your friend. And I say, this is sort of a roadmap to getting your entire friends and family killed. And they say, oh, I didn't think of that. So a lot of the question for us is digital literacy and figuring out creative solutions. So one of my favorites is a digital pen that we've been using, where you can document information directly onto paper even, and then burn the paper and still have the information backed up onto the pen. So even the monks are for Aranye. Anyone? Aranye. This is a campaign we did to translate Cory Doctorow's little brother into local ethnic languages. This is a false slide. So translating into local ethnic languages to give the people more of a sense of what digital literacy is through storytelling and getting them aware of the power of mapping and be able to visualize what it really can do and the impact that it can really have back down onto the community. Still dead slides. So I want to end on a more optimistic note and say that even in a censored society like Burma, people still have these visions of what the future can be. Here's an example of what the Google homepage can be because it's banned inside Burma. But what would it look like if we even had this in our own language? So here in Amsterdam, we're working on mapping with high school students, with secondary school students, connecting them with schools in the New York area, where kids can add and remove what they would like to see in their societies by the year 2020, and using open government data to better inform what their cities are doing and what they could do in the future.